Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm so happy you're back here with me. We are just down the hill from our campsite at a park where there's a Wi-Fi signal. And Brian's outside at the park bench hanging out, giving me a little bit of space so that I can be with you all. Thank you, Brian. I know you're watching. Um, and today I'm actually going to do a little bit of a rant. If you've watched some of my past rant videos, I have one on religion, education system, medical system. I can't remember if I have more than that, but it's really just whatever's alive in me, which is, so I'm kind of hanging out with you talking about what's alive in me. And what's alive in me right now is really the pain over, or in my own parts, reaction to non-therapists being excluded from the IFS Institute after 30 years of being included. And this change, I think it's been almost 2 years since this change happened. I have another video about that you can look for. It's something about the question of, can I unburden exiles in myself or other people if I'm not IFS Institute trained? Um, Short answer, yes. Yes, you can, because the determining factor is really how much self-energy we have in any given moment. But anyway, when I do a quote unquote rant, it's we'll see what happens in this one, but I kind of give permission to some of my parts who are feeling angry or feeling like there's an injustice to speak up a little bit. Often I have listened to them and processed it already, and so there will be self-energy around it or kind of speaking for the parts, for the most part. But I like to, in IFS, it's not that we suppress our parts who feel wounded, offended, rejected, hurt, in pain, angry, scared, all those things. We give them voice, we let them speak, and the self listens and listens for their unmet needs. And then the self meets them in a beautiful way. So I'm going to tell you the story of kind of how my parts met me in this. Before I talk about that, and how that came alive in me again recently, um, I just want to give a shout out to some of the people who gave gifts on the YouTube gift. I was going to call it an app feature, I guess. So if you go to the bottom right of this video, you'll see either a heart with a dollar sign or ellipses, three dots, and then you can click on that and see the heart with the dollar sign, and that's where you can give a gift. So I'm going to shout out some of the people who gave gifts recently. I'm looking it up. Thank you so much, Ralph Juniper, 2172. Your gratitude and your gift means so much. And of course, every gift goes to make everything on my website, self-paced courses, workshops, worksheets, and meditations as free gifts to anyone who wants them. We're going to talk about that in this video as kind of an act of subversive rebellion against the gatekeeping of the systems, to make that choice, to make it available, that all are welcome. Okay. And thank you so much to Karen Tisdale, 4014, for your gift as well. And Karen actually has a quick question, and I responded to Karen and said, she says, I just love the parts that parts have a self and the whole inner family could live in harmony, all parts knowing their true essence. Yeah. And she asked if I could give or maybe do a video that explores more about that. And I said, I'm not sure I can make a whole video on parts having a capital S self, except to say that in my experience, um, and essentially parts carry burdens. Wait, oh, except I said, except that that is my experience, that parts have a self And essentially, parts carry burdens, and once they are unburdened, they often display self-like qualities like presence and playfulness, curiosity, creativity, compassion. Um, their job, a lot of times, parts' job is really to protect us, or they have, like I said, burdens of what they've experiences that we've had that they are carrying with them that need to be healed. But once they feel safe, then their own self emerges. And it's really to me like a fractal, right? That extends infinitely inward and outward. And that self is really the essence of everything. It's consciousness, it's capital L love, right? These are all words that are like pointing to the experience. But just like we have a core self, or really I feel like our self emanates all around us. And the same is true of all of our parts because it's kind of like a nesting doll or fractal. So, okay. So that's all I will say about that. But thank you, Karen, for that question. And without further ado, I will tell you the story of my parts kind of getting activated around IFSI. So, as many of you know, if you've watched our first inaugural episode of the Self-Led Besties podcast with myself and Hallie and David, um, we all three of us are just so enamored with IFS, with the truth of IFS, right? With the reality, the experience that we are multiple and that there are no bad parts. Our parts always make sense what they're doing, even if they are misunderstood by other people. Thank you for that nuance, David. And so that is our experience. And then also this beautiful, really supernatural essence that at the core, or however you want to describe it, at our core or all around us, available to us, is what's called the capital S self in IFS, but it is unconditional love that can be in relationship with our parts in any given moment that they arise. And that is where healing occurs. As I always say, healing always occurs in this moment as I bring loving awareness, um, or as I allow the loving awareness to come in, however you want to describe it, toward the parts of me that suffer or that are active in any way. So, um, IFS is not just a practice that we use, that we teach, that we use with clients. It really is a lifestyle for all three of us. And so we have a thread called the SLB thread between us, where we talk about what's alive in us, what's activating our parts. We offer self energy to each other. It's really beautiful. And um, we all three of us are practitioners, so we are not officially trained therapists. Now, I do have training and was an educational therapist for 20 years, and Hallie and David have their own careers that they have had in the past. But for all three of us, in our own healing journey, as they say, we have come to IFS. It has transformed our lives. And it's kind of like the good news, and we want to share it with other people, right? So it's coming from an overflow, an inner motivation. We're impelled to share kind of thing. And I don't want to go into all of my story because some of you may already know it. I've shared it a few times, but when I met IFS, I essentially was already practicing IFS. So I had put together all these things that worked for me. I began to call in meditation as I observed my physical self, my body, my emotions, and my thoughts. I began to observe what I called the kind watcher, that there was a presence that was loving toward everything that was alive in me that came out when I was still enough. And eventually I started calling that the curious and compassionate witness, because as I observed it, it was like it was very curious. It delighted in me and what was alive in me. And it was very compassionate and warm and loving. It was also wise. I could call on wisdom from it. So I'm just kind of describing this experience that I'm having on the inside. And then I started learning shamanic journeying, and I did what I called time travel, would take that wise and loving adult self, curious and compassionate witness, back with me into moments of trauma and redo the scene there and make it different in that it now has a compassionate witness in it, which it didn't have before, right? And I would experience such profound healing and transformation. So it's kind of like all of these pieces. And I already understood the multiplicity of myself, that I had an inner critic and this curious and compassionate witness related to the critic and to these parts that were stuck back here. So it was kind of like I observed in myself and found a very similar reality to what Dick found when he observed his clients. So when I found IFS, it wasn't like it was a recognition, right? It wasn't like, oh, there's this new thing that I'm being taught. It's, ooh, I've been practicing this. And I was very appreciative that Dick put it in a pretty concise, efficient model, right? So I grabbed onto it. I was coached by Martha Beck. She introduced the model to me, and it was just amazing. I began to appreciate a polarization of protective parts in me. And I went home and bought uh, Internal Family Systems, uh, Internal Family Systems second edition. The essentially like the textbook of IFS by Dick Schwartz and Martha Sweezy. I devoured it, and as I went through it, I didn't get the memo that I wasn't supposed to be able to use the full model on myself or anyone else without training, because it's presented in the book, and I practiced it, and it was transformative. I shared my experience with people, just like someone would share the good news because they're so excited about it. Started teaching my fellow coaches, started using it with coaching clients I already had, was seeing transformation. So it wasn't until I went, I can't remember if I was in the circle program. Okay, because I entered at the time, there was a lottery. Now, people like me at that time were actually included in the training. They were allowed to enter the lottery to be chosen to be in the training. But I entered the lottery for 3 years and never, ever, ever got in. So I still had some frustration of like, this is held at arm's length for me. It's not really available. But I didn't let it frustrate me because I thought this is something I kind of knew and practiced before I met IFS. So I don't need anyone's permission to do it. I was already doing it. I have seen the fruit of it. And but there was more of people outside of me didn't give me credence or legitimacy unless I had this training. So there were parts that were like, okay, we just have to get the training, even though we're already using it and know it. And but as fate will, the universe would have it, I never got in, but I just continued to share what was alive in me and what was um, excitingly bubbling up within me. So I think it's been at least 5 years that I have exclusively shared about and taught IFS. And have created courses. I've had 6-week groups. I've had weekly support groups. I've had, all of these videos, all of this stuff. It is my special interest. It is my life, my lifestyle. It feels like, I often say, the most effective, direct, effective, holistic, compassionate healing method that I've encountered, right? So I'm a huge fan, even though I never got into the official training. I had many clients and group members and different people who had been trained, got into the training and went through it, and they said, "Oh, Christine, you know so much more than the training. You're beyond it," which of course was validating to some of my parts. But then about 2 years ago, there was a decision by IFSI and Dick Schwartz to close the training, to make it not available anymore to non-therapists, non-mental health professionals, right? Because before that, it was available to any kind of spiritual teacher, coach, clergy, person in the medical field, anybody who wanted to learn it and use it to help their clients or help their friends and family, right? It was available. And so now suddenly they're closing the availability of this model. And they did start another program for coaches, but it was still a lot of gatekeeping. Still, you have to have credentials as a coach and certifications as a coach. And so there became all these layers and hoops you have to jump through before you can even get to IFS. And it's still very exclusionary, very gatekeeping. And I've talked in another video about my view that it comes from a lot of protective parts because they feel like harm has been done to certain people using IFS. And so their parts are trying to say, never again. I don't want that to happen again. So we're going to essentially police who can use IFS. And I get those parts. I have deep empathy and compassion for the fears of those parts, but I still believe that it is a protective parts led decision and not a self-led decision. And so anyway, I didn't intend to give all of that backstory, but for anyone who doesn't already know that part of the story, so recently, or let me just give one more piece. Okay, so I was using IFS on myself, with my clients, with my colleagues, extensively, and seeing transformative results for maybe a year, at least a year or two. And that's when it was relayed to me, I can't remember by who, that I wasn't allowed to do unburdenings at the time because I hadn't had the official IFS Institute training. But now it would be, you're not allowed to if you're not a therapist at all. I remember Gabby Bernstein, who went through, I believe, level 1, 2, and 3 of the training, wrote her book, and on a podcast explicitly had to say, but let me be clear that I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not trained as a therapist, so I cannot unburden. And my parts just felt so sad, right? Because that's a clear shift from anyone and everyone can use this model, as long as they're in self energy, as long as they learn the model and they are sincere and in self energy, the practitioners, all kinds of people can. And then now there's this line in the sand that IFSI's official statement, and my assumption, I don't know, is that Gabby was told she had to say that. And that it's from these really fearful protectors. Like, let me be clear with you that only these select few who've been vetted can use this and can unburden. Okay. So at that time, when people started telling me, oh, you're not allowed to use it, it felt almost funny because it's like, okay, but I have. But then that actually did activate some parts in me that started to feel afraid. Oh my gosh, what if I'm going to hurt people? What if they're right? What if I'm going to cause people ultimately, right, to let their suicidal parts take over and end their life? And at the time I was in IFS Circle, I think, or maybe it was the continuity program, and a man asked Dick Schwartz, he said, I'll never be able to use IFS like you do. And Dick said, and I'll never forget it. He said, the only thing keeping you from using IFS like me is the parts of you who think that you can't. And so what I would suggest is go toward those parts, right? And meet with them and meet their concerns, and then you can. And I took that to heart at the time. And so I met with all these parts. I didn't meet with clients or teach during that time when my parts were so afraid that I was going to harm somebody, because it was actually them that would manifest that, right? Because they would block my own self energy. And so I met with them. There were lots of roots in parts that blamed me or other parts for my first husband's death by suicide. That's one of the big traumas that my system has had to move through. And so they made sense. They made complete sense, that fear, right? And in myself, my capital S self, that loving source, was able to very confidently and clearly reflect back to them that they were not responsible for that, and that I am never responsible for another person's parts or choices. I'm only responsible for taking care of my own parts and then therefore showing up in self with a client, a loved one, whoever it may be. And that is the only thing that I have responsibility over. And it was so clear and deeply communicated and reflected to me that my parts were unburdened around that. And then from then on, I was able to work with clients and unburden parts with confidence and clarity. And there's a part that wants to explain that the reason why I don't do one-on-ones with people now is because it kind of partly has to do with the collective cultural burden, in my opinion, of this understanding of therapy, and that the therapist is the primary caregiver of the other person and has some kind of authority. There's a power dynamic there. And my system completely rejects that. And so as much as I would remind clients of that repeatedly, it felt like it was such a burden to people that they would come in with that and have parts that would desperately want me to be their primary caregiver and really resist taking the baton. And that became really difficult for my own system. And I had, again, kind of the wisdom of self telling me, and this is going to play into later because I actually, spoiler alert, myself essentially talked to Dick's self and got some clarity about what's happening for Dick. Um, but I Oh, now I lost my train of thought. Oh, okay, I got it back. Thank you. Um, so I uh got this clarity from my own self, all cap self, right? But just this essence, this presence of unconditional love and wisdom. And again, when I receive that, it feels very clear and very calm and very grounded. And the message was, Christine, you can do one-on-ones. You're good at one-on-ones, but it's just not, you don't have all the time and the energy in the world to do everything. And that's not the path meant for you. It's not that it's a bad path or it's not meant for other people, but your path is teaching and groups and making this information available to as many people as possible. And no path is like better than another. It's just your path, right? So that's another reason why I focus my time and energy on teaching and groups. Okay, now I'm actually getting to the part that I intended to start with. So last week, my dear friend and SLB, Self-Led Bestie, Hallie, did a training with Dick Schwartz and his wife, Jean. And I won't go into, Hallie, all of the experience that you, if you're watching this, had in that, but just that there was a thread and she was actually sharing in real time what, all kinds of things, what was being shared in the training, what was being shared in the chat because she was online. And the overall experience, and how you can correct me in the comments if I'm misrepresenting you, but was one of feeling like the environment was hostile toward her as a non-therapist. And there were parts of her that felt like I have to hide, I'm not accepted here, I'm exiled essentially. And she explained that it felt like she longed for a community of people who recognize, kind of the way I put it was like the elephant in the room, the reality that there, I can't remember how many times she said they repeated 10 or 20 times, like, yes, we do not allow anyone who's not a therapist and at least level one trained to unburden and exile. And they kept reiterating that line. And she thought, it's almost like a gaslighting, right? It's like, are there people, is there anyone in the room who remembers that non-therapists were allowed, given permission by the IFSI and Dick, to do the full IFS process for 30 plus years? At the whole bulk of when this, therapy existed. And somehow it's become rote, old hat, or I don't know what the word is, like understood now that no, now they cannot. That the line has been crossed and now this has changed. So she just felt kind of alone, right, in that group. And she would go into the breakout groups and she would be the most proficient in IFS and helping other people with it because she lives and breathes IFS. And a lot of these people are just coming to get their CE credits and they're therapists, but they don't really know about IFS. And she would say, they're speaking, blended with their parts, but they're not aware of it, right? They're not aware that they're speaking as their parts and not for their parts. And, they were really grateful to her for helping them. And she thought, I wonder if they knew that I am not a therapist, if they would dismiss, what I know or what I'm able to do with IFS. So anyway, and there were lots of other comments about, can you believe this person, sold me a training or a group experience, and then I found out later they're actually not a therapist. But come to find out, this person is a practitioner that has IFS level 3 training and has been using IFS with neurodivergent people for many, many, many years and has extensive experience. But they were putting this person down and saying they're not qualified because they're not a therapist. So just lots and lots of comments like that, right? That are making Hallie feel, ooh, I'm the other here. I'm the one that's seen as dangerous and scary and othered and excluded. Okay, so as she's having this conversation with David and I, our other self-led bestie, um, oh, I'm just reading my notes so I don't forget, but that there's a bit of, even of a bait and switch in the training because as Dick often does, he'll display the model very concisely, right? He'll go through, he'll meet the protectors, ask them if they'll step back, meet the exile, do the unburdening, and he models the whole process. So it's almost like a bait and switch to do that for demos in the training and say, this is the whole model, but you can't use it. Nah, 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 nah. Haha. You can't use it because you're not, even though you're a therapist, you're not level 1 trained yet. Which makes sense. I understand a person not using it if they don't have self-energy or if they don't know the model yet, but not gatekeeping it to such a degree of, because a lot of those people, if they still have to get into the lottery, it could be years and years, right, before they get level 1 trained. And so if that means that now you know the model, but you can't use it, it would feel frustrating. And the biggest injustice in my system that I felt really angry about was particularly our 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 third SLV, David, is level 2 trained, has paid all the money to have the training, gone through all the hours of the training, gotten lots of experience, is incredibly genuine, incredibly self-led, does all kinds of IFS work in himself. And to be told, you paid all this money, you're in, you're accredited essentially, but then suddenly now you're not. And now we're spreading the word to clients and to other people that they can't trust you, that you're dangerous, even though we accepted you in and now we're pushing you out. It felt like such an injustice to me. And I said, I have, first of all, a deep desire that Dick Schwartz and IFSI would come out and say explicitly, at least, all the people that we train that were non-therapists are legitimate. Please take them legitimately, or, you know, take them seriously or something like that. But then they'd have to explain how suddenly those types of people are illegitimate, right? So they're in a predicament for sure. So then I mentioned in our group chat that I had this fantasy of sitting down one-on-one with Dick and really getting curious with him about, why this decision? Tell me like the roots, tell me the underneath, like of what happened, right? Did people who were untrained work with someone and then they died by suicide and then the model was blamed, or, you know, what happened to create this decision? And as my own parts, so first my parts were trying to fill in the blanks and kind of have theories about it. So my parts said, the theory they had, actually, I'm just going to read what I wrote in the thread, in our SLB thread, because uh, that's probably easiest. This was my parts theory. So my parts theory, is that Dick has tender parts who desperately wanted approval from his father. And this is information that he has made public, right? This own vulnerability. He wanted approval from his father, who was a physician and a scientist and academician, and his brothers followed in that vein, and he wasn't able to become a doctor, and in many ways felt like a failure to his parts felt like they failed his father. So so my theory was that Dick has tender parts who desperately want approval from his father, and the academic scientific world represents his father to Dick. So early on, Dick's ideas about IFS were routinely rejected by therapists. Again, this is all in what Dick talks about in his history. So they were routinely rejected by therapists, but they were embraced by spiritual practitioners, yogis, and coaches, and different people who, again, like me, I think already had the experience and were like, oh, yes, 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 this resonates. This is truth. And so those people really bought into and started supporting and learning IFS. However, once IFS became more popular, kind of more, I don't know, in the last 5-10 years, um, actual therapists, trained therapists now are open to it and wanting to try it. So the parts of Dick, the tender parts that want to please his father, are so pleased by this, right? Ooh, I'm getting validation from academic trained therapist world. And so as more and more of those therapists came into his trainings, their domestication of gatekeeping, qualifications, oversight, right? We got to get the CE credits, we got to be licensed, we can only practice in our state. All of those stipulations that, we've got to do all of these years of training before we can practice. All of those rules and regulations that were put on them, my parts theory was that the therapists who are in the IFS training, there's a certain level of envy and jealousy of, wait, those practitioners are allowed to learn IFS and use it immediately and use it with clients all around the world, and they don't have oversight and they didn't have all the training I had. Like, I have to be under these managers, under these rules and regulations, and they should too. And then it became, they're dangerous because they haven't had all of these things that we've had. So I think then those people started putting more and more pressure on IFS Institute and Dick to say, this model is for trauma. It should only be available to people who are trauma informed, which is the amazing things that a majority of therapists are not trained in trauma, which is just a crazy thing to my system, because to me, everything, every quote unquote pathology comes from trauma. And again, in my experience, and Dick would say this, and I believe Mike Elkin, other trainers in IFS would say this, that often it was the therapists in their groups that had a lot more to unlearn because they had been trained in these pathologies. IFS is very different than a lot of other therapies, right? That kind of bolster the managers. So there was a lot that they had to unlearn in order to embrace IFS, whereas the practitioners were coming to IFS already having this experience. And there was less kind of cultural or academic, unburdening that had to happen before they could embrace it. But as these therapists are there, they're thinking of all the oversight that they have to go through and saying, in order to make IFS legitimate and to be even seen as legitimate by our fellow therapists, we need there to be the same kind of gatekeeping, oversight, rules and regulations, um, uh, hoops to jump through, all those things in order for IFS to be taken seriously. And so then there was all these pushes to do double blind, tests and scientific proof that IFS works, which for my system, just like I know that shamanic journeying works or yoga works for people because there are thousands, if not millions, of people who have had that experience. And when you've had that experience, you trust it, right? You don't need a scientist to say, well, it's worked for 80% of this other group because I'm an experiment of one and it's helped me, right? So whereas my parts don't need all that scientific validation, I understand why Dick's parts and these therapist parts needed that, right? So then as that ball kind of got rolling, I think some of those tender parts of Dick really wanted to continue that validation and be validated, particularly by that group of people. And in doing so, they put pressure on him to exclude the very people who first embraced him and who first embraced IFS. That's why it feels like such an affront, Um, so yeah, his tender parts, desperate to please his father, agreed with this community. And anyway, that's my theory about it. Okay, so then um, after I let my parts kind of theorize about all of that, I uh, David wrote in the group chat and said, "Ooh, I wonder if you could try to kind of telepathically connect yourself with Dick's self." And I thought, "Ooh, that's a wonderful idea. We're in a campground where there's no Wi-Fi signal. I have nothing better to do. I have all the time in the world." So I decided to just sit. And the way this works for me is that and this is something where, it might feel far out there to some of your parts, like telepathically connect to another person. Okay, Christine, whatever. And that's okay with me. I don't expect you to believe it. The reason why I believe it is you'll see is that I receive answers that feel like they're outside of me that I was not thinking about before. And they give me clarity and insight that is so it makes everything make sense. I have peace about it. The fruit of it is so good that it's very validating to me, to my system. So, okay, so the way that I do this is if I ever want to connect to the self of another person, it's very important that I'm connecting self to self. So I first have to spend time with the parts of me who might block that. So I spend time with any parts who have agenda or anger or urgency or all those parts that gave those theories, right? That have any kind of assumption or theory about anything, right? So I'm acknowledging them and appreciating them, and then I'm asking if they are willing to relax so that myself can connect with Dick's self, which you'll see my experience was more that it wasn't Dick's self that could have been, but it was like the all cap self, the self that sees everything and everyone. Again, I'm just describing my experience. So once my parts relaxed, it was as if I myself was connected to the all cap self, and I was kind of having a bird's eye view of Dick. And he was there was a sense of him kind of running around and having a lot of energy. And the first thing that came to me was actually something that Dick said in an interview. Someone asked him a really great question. They said, people like Magic Johnson or Shaq or whatever, I don't know, all these great athletes, would they be great athletes if their parts had been unburdened? Because it was their burdened parts that pushed them and pushed them and pushed them to excel. So if they were unburdened, they wouldn't be these great athletes. And Dick said, that's right. That's true. They wouldn't. They wouldn't have burdened parts that would push them and push them, but they would be happy. Their inner quality of life would be so much better. They would be happier individuals, right? And so as a culture, we put so much importance on like someone being rich and famous and talented and I don't know, and all these things. But there's this understanding that that's not actually the greatest thing. The greatest thing is someone who feels at home in their body and who feels harmony and peace and joy right in their life. So he was saying that's what they exchanged. You know what I mean? So anyway, there was this kind of view of Dick running around, kind of going to conferences, doing trainings, doing interviews, doing a lot of activity. And it was saying he wouldn't be as successful with IFS right now if he were unburdened. So there's this trade-off of, and there was no judgment in this assessment at all. It was just an observation of his success that he's gained in IFS, even now, more recently, is because of his burden parts, essentially. So, and that was just an interesting thing that I was shown. And then another thing that was communicated to me was this is what Dick's soul was put on this earth to do. You can feel frustrated by it, but it just is what it is. And there was this sense from what I would call all cap self, loving essence, that of all monkey, which you might not know what that means. I'll just explain really quickly. So all monkey comes from a, a story that Martha Beck tells, where she was explaining again her experience of being in meditation, and that it was almost like there was this mediator, which in IFS we might call like a self-like part or a manager or something. But it was kind of an observer. And so she was saying it's kind of like these three levels. There's the body, the emotions, the parts, right? The psyche. And then there's this observer, and then there's this loving essence. Okay. So for example, and she calls like her own body the monkey, right? Kind of like in Buddhism, they say the monkey mind. Okay. So she would say, okay, let's say I hit my knee on the dresser and my body's in pain. It hurts. My knee is throbbing, right? So the observer, this mediator, says, I would like to report that the monkey's knee is hurting, is in pain. And then the curious and compassionate witness, the loving source, would say, oh, monkey. And it would convey this message of delight, love, warmth, compassion. So this is what I would call the self. Some people would call love. Some people will call God if their God is loving. Universe, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Okay. But that source of love, she said, would always say, oh, monkey, but it would be in different tones, essentially. Right? Like if there were, I would like to report that monkey is feeling really, really stressed about this problem, trying to figure out this problem. Then the loving source would say, oh, monkey, right? Like, oh, sweetheart, you're spinning your wheels and you don't have to, right? There's so much implied in the tone of the all monkey. Okay, so having that context, when I asked about Dick, and I'm just receiving like wisdom and information about the situation. It was like this all monkey. Like you and many others think that Dick's existence or involvement in IFS is more important than other people's. Like you as humans, you as monkeys, you as these cute monkeys, like put people on pedestals and think that certain people are more important than others. That it was saying, this is what Dick's soul has been put on the earth to do. This is his path. And so he's doing some things and not doing others. He made IFS available to all these people, and now he's focusing on therapists. And that's his to do. But it doesn't negate that you and many others have other paths, right? And your path is just as important as his. It reminds me of Derek Scott, right? Who continued to open up his training, the IFS Canada. And I believe it's still open to non-therapists and therapists alike, right? So people like that, people like Jay Early, who have teach IFS to everyone, anyone who wants it. And so I was telling Hallie, my self-led bestie Hallie, that that's partly why for me, I don't want to have any kind of barriers to IFS. All are welcome. IFS is welcome for everyone. Parts work, whatever you want to call it, right? Because I knew it before it was IFS to me. This idea of multiplicity and the self in relationship with our hurting parts and healing them, that is available to everybody, to use on their own, to support each other in. And so that's why all of my self-paced courses, all of my workshops, everything on my website, meditations, etc., is a free gift to anyone. There's no barrier to them. I guess they would have to have a computer or some kind of device, but they could probably get on one at the library if they wanted to. So and so Hallie said, "Oh, this is an act of rebellion," or I can't remember the word you used, Hallie. This is an act, a subversive act, right, to make it available to everyone. And I have parts that are working on a vision right now of creating something called the Ordinary Sacred School of Self-Leadership, which is essentially open to anybody and everybody who wants to learn about parts work to use with themselves or clients or loved ones or whoever they want to share it with, and would be open to anyone. So it's kind of like respecting that this is the path and this is where Dick's parts and system and other people in IFSI, this is where they're going, and this is for good or bad. It was kind of this sense of like there's no good or bad in it. It just is what it is. But they are not more important, or their path doesn't have to be my path or your path, right? And so it's just always about all of us connecting to any of our parts that block our self energy, so that our self energy can come through to meet with our own parts, with other people's parts. So let me see. I think that I have talked about most everything on my notes page. So I just wanted to share this with you all because one, it's a example of allowing your parts to get activated by something, right? If they allowing them to speak and say, this is unjust, right? This doesn't feel right. Like your parts are allowed to feel rejected, to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel whatever they feel, and to listen to them and to even listen to their theories, right? About, maybe it's because of this, maybe it's because of that. They're trying to make sense of other people in order to try to have curiosity and compassion toward them, right? Um, part of the self energy of my parts, right? But then also when I'm still enough and those parts feel heard enough to be able to rest back enough, then and if they're not willing to rest back, that's okay. They just need to be heard more, right? But then being able to receive the wisdom, the love, the equanimity, the calm energy, the it is what it is, and everything's okay. You can't get it wrong. Dick can't get it wrong. IFSI can't get it wrong. You can't get it wrong. Um, this is their path, this is your path, and it's all good. That sense to me is definitely the essence of what I experience from all cap self, capital L love, divine, whatever you want to call that. Again, it's an experience, and all those words are just the finger pointing to the experience, but not the experience. Um, so I don't know. I just wanted to share kind of the trajectory of the experiences that Hallie and David have had, our interaction, and hopefully we'll see. We hope to have a conversation, the three of us together, on an upcoming podcast about it, because I do think, like Hallie said, I'm longing for a community of people who are just recognizing this reality, who are calling out the elephant in the room. Wait a minute. All of these people were allowed to practice IFS for 30 years, and now suddenly they're the ones who are very dangerous. Oh, let me say one more thing. I have a part pointing out that I don't know if you all have seen it, but there's an article not too long ago that was published, kind of not a hit piece on IFS, but it was just talking about these girls who were at a I think in-home living group home kind of thing for girls with eating disorders, and they primarily used IFS. Dick had trained their people, um, and they essentially had experienced abuse, and they experienced all kinds of things. And so the article is attributing it to IFS, and kind of it's a scathing article against IFS. And Dick came out and said, I feel so terrible for the things that these people have experienced. It's not indicative of IFS. It's indicative of people who are being abusive and abusing the model. And so, and I appreciated that. I completely agree with him. But in the article, one interesting thing, they did interview Dick. And one thing I appreciated that the journalist asked was, Dick said, well, we're making the model more safe now because, oh, and in the training with Hallie, Dick actually used the word police. We are policing who can use the model, which Hallie thought, ooh, I can't remember if it's Hallie or David said, ooh, if that's not a manager, right? The police manager. Um, but so he was assuring this journalist, we're putting all these things into place so that IFS cannot be used as a tool of harm anymore, and we are basically not allowing non-therapists to use it anymore. And the journalist, who was very astute, said, yes, but this man who ran the center was a fully licensed, credentialed therapist and was in fact trained personally by you, and he still caused harm. And Dick had to accede to that and say that's true. And so again, that's my bias, is that as much as the protectors try to say, well, if we just oust the practitioners, then we'll be safe. No, unfortunately not. Right? Because that's not the problem. Um, Therapists can do harm, therapists can do wonderful transformative work as well. Non-therapists can do harm, non-therapists can do wonderful transformative work. It's really more the focus that in my experience Derek Scott had, and that I believe is the focus is on really helping any practitioner do the work on themselves and have that inner relationship with their own parts to such a degree that they can detect their parts and meet with them in any given moment in order for their self to emerge toward their client or whoever's in front of them. So the level of self energy in any given moment is the indicator, not how much training, not how much CE credits, not how trauma informed, not licensing and certification and all of those things, as much as the protective parts mean well and really want that to eradicate the danger. All right. So if you have listened this far, thank you. for hanging out with me. Again, my parts will tell Brian when I get up. Yeah, I rambled on for quite a while. And but it is something that's alive in me. And I'm curious your thoughts. Maybe this is something you're not really familiar with or doesn't affect you so much, or maybe it's something that really affects you. Maybe you're what I also want to say, I don't know if you're a therapist, if you will have watched to this point. I don't want to assume that, but if you are a therapist, I have no enmity whatsoever towards you. I've often said it feels like it can be hard when my net is wide enough to include others, but their net is not wide enough to include me. So it's not uh, an anger or frustration towards therapists. If anything, I feel empathy and compassion because of, like I said, all the hoops that you've had to go through. I can understand why it would feel really frustrating. Why does that person not have to go through all the things I've had to go through? I'll often tell therapists, yeah, rebrand yourself as a coach and take off all the constraints and just solely focus on your own relationship with your parts and if you have self energy. But that's hard to do. You have to really unburden those culturally burdened parts around all the hoops, you have to go through or else. All the policing. So, but if you're a therapist, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, your perspective, your experience. If you're a coach, practitioner, spiritual guide, love to hear your thoughts and experience on this. If you're a client, anyone, yeah, tell me if you have any thoughts, any questions. And if you have watched this far, let's see, you can, okay, I'm thinking, ooh, what could be a good emoji? I guess whatever emotion you're feeling at the end of this. You might feel still confused. You might feel angry. You might feel um, content, peaceful, happy. Uh, Whatever emoji represents the emotion that you feel at the end. All right. I look forward to hopefully seeing you all next week and may be kind to yourselves and all your parts until we meet again.